Last week, we were looking at the history of the Christian church, and we looked at the athletes of God, and we referred to asceticism, or the denial and even punishment of the flesh in an effort to enhance the spirit. This is not a biblical position, but rather a vestige of Greek philosophy. I find the practice of the athletes of God in the Middle Ages to be humorous, though a noble attempt to attain a greater knowledge of the holy. One of the early, well, way earlier, pioneers of this ascetic life and an athlete of God in his own right was a man named Quintus Septimius Florens Tertullianus. He was born in 150 AD in Carthage. 200 years later, Augustine would be born, and at age 17, he would go to live in Carthage. Carthage is located in what is now Tunisia. At that time, it was part of the Roman Empire in North Africa, and it was second in importance only to the city of Rome in the Roman Empire at that time. Tertullian's father was the captain of a Roman legion and provided him with an education to become a lawyer. But Tertullian converted to Christianity at age 40, and he eagerly embraced the gospel, and he became a leader in the church, not just the local church in Carthage, no, but the church globally. Well, what was Tertullian's impact and place in the history of the church? Well, there's at least four things which I'll place in two categories that would characterize Tertullian's influence and impact on the church. The two categories that I will set aside are, first of all, church life, and the second would be theological formulation. Let's look at Tertullian's impact on church life first. Tertullian lived in the latter half of the 2nd century AD. He was born in 150 AD. And remember, the Gospel of John was written in approximately 95 AD. That means that Tertullian would have been closer to John the Apostle than we are to World War II. Tertullian was pretty close to the beginning of the post-apostolic era. Jesus had handed the enterprise of the church off to the disciples, and now the disciples had handed off the enterprise to the next generation. Tertullian would be in that next generation of church leaders in a strategic city, the strategic city of Carthage in the Roman Empire. It was a time of unimaginable persecution. I know we think of persecution as the IRS employing extra scrutiny on the tax status of Christian organizations or the like, which of course is not right. But in Tertullian's day, the day of catacombs, persecution was being thrown to the lions in the Colosseum or engaging in mortal combat with Roman gladiators for the entertainment of the pagan masses. Tertullian taught that even persecution was from God. He believed, and with good reason, that the persecution of the church by the Roman authorities actually strengthened the church. Tertullian would famously say, "The blood of Christians is the seed of the church." Overlapping my first point is the second point, which is that Tertullian felt that there was entirely too much conformity of the church to the pagan culture, and that persecution contributed to the winnowing out of the coziness of Christianity to the culture of their day. Tertullian railed against the compromise of the day, and in his later years would even go so far as to join a group of isolationists called the Montanists, who stayed free from compromise with the world by staying free from the world and staying away from the world. It was an early expression of the monastery, and even though their theology was a little off kilter, Tertullian chose that over what he perceived to be the church's conformity and coziness with the world. This move put him at odds with the larger church, and he eventually left the Montanist sect to reconnect with the Orthodox Church family. So that's Tertullian's main impact on church life. A second area where Tertullian had impact on the church was on theological formulation. The early church flirted with the dualistic concepts of Greek philosophy. The Gnostics were the leading vanguard in that first century. The Apostle Paul took the fight to the Gnostics in the book of Colossians. The Gnostics believed that flesh was evil and the spirit was good. Well, the problem with that is that, among other things, that the second of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, became flesh and blood. That's what's meant by incarnation. If someone is carnivorous, they eat flesh. In the Spanish language, carne means flesh. Incarnation means that something becomes flesh. Jesus, even in the Gnostic mind, was spirit, but became both spirit and flesh. The Gnostics pushed back and said that Jesus was God and therefore could not have been flesh, since flesh was evil. Paul countered that by saying, in him, that is in Christ, all the fullness of deity dwelt in bodily form. That's Colossians 2:9. Tertullian fought tooth and nail against the Gnostic heresy, finally and famously saying, "What has Athens to do with Jerusalem?" A second area where Tertullian had an impact on theological formulation was in the area of theology proper. It was Tertullian who coined the word Trinity. Trinity is not a biblical word, but Tertullian used it to carve out a place for the concept of the three-in-one God. The idea of Trinity is ultimately beyond our comprehension. Many have sought to find a metaphor to describe three-in-one, but without success. All illustrations break down at some point. Tertullian chose a unique word to describe this distinctively unique Christian concept. We think of the Trinity automatically as three in one, but that was not so in Tertullian's day. You see, we stand on the shoulders of such great men as Tertullian, who chisel out great and important truths, such as the Trinity, for our benefit. As someone observed, we see so far because we stand on the shoulders of greatness. Well, Tertullian died in 229 AD. There have been colorful people, including the athletes of God, in the history of the church, and there have been great people in the history of the church, but Tertullian stands not uniquely, but rarely, as both great and colorful, a giant among giants in the history of our church. We thank the Lord for imperfect greatness such as Tertullian, who have guided our forefathers through great and difficult times. Thanks for joining today. God bless you, and God bless America.